Hello, this is Gavin Bobby here. I'm here doing my first stream with Horus, and we're going to be discussing the current problems that we face and what we think can be done about them. So Horus, as you know, he does some really great streams, and he's very good on Telegram as well. I think he's one of the people who take seriously the need to think things through now. Whilst nothing much is happening, he is taking this opportunity to think things through. That's why I wanted to talk to him, why I wanted to talk with him today. What I'm hoping we can do is to delve deeper into some of these issues, to try and work out what may happen and what we can do about it. So what I'd like to do is to ask Horus if he'd come off mute and say hello to everyone.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, thanks for having me on, Gavin. I think you're very kind about the quality of my output. I haven't really done much for ages, but yeah, I've been following your videos talking about this for 3 years or so, where your prediction of like how our problems might be resolved, and I was interested in it from the very start. I think it's exactly what we should be talking about, even if we can't come to any firm conclusions, which I suspect at least I won't today. But
yeah,
we'll try and figure our way towards something more illuminated, maybe. But yeah, I think it's well worth talking about. And I noticed a few videos ago you called for people to sort of debate this with you, right? And I was talking to Chris Dangerfield at the same time. Obviously, some people will have seen us on Dangerfield's channel 2 weeks ago. But I echo what you said, that like anybody who has any thoughts about the future really and what can be done, or just predictions even, I think they should get in touch with you one way or another. They can get in touch with me, you via me if they want, but yeah, I think it's something everyone should be talking about. I would also notice that like ever since I first mentioned this to people, like what you were talking about, some people just think you're just a counter jihad guy or only concerned with Islam, and thereby maybe only, a lot of counter-jihad people won't talk about legal immigration or reversing immigration, and they're just completely wrong about that. I think maybe you put it in your own words, but you are, concerned with the demographics question and questions of ethnicity and so on. And so, yeah, I think you're undervalued by some people.
Oh, thank you. That's very nice. Yeah. Just so people know, I think the counter jihad is dead. It has failed. It is defunct. It is going nowhere. I noticed that an awful lot of former counter jihadists have simply veered sideways. I would count as an example of that. The prime example is Tommy Robinson. I saw him on YouTube recently doing a short saying Muslims and Christians need to unite in order to resist globalism. That's simply, I think, a symptom of the failure of the counter jihad. We've lost that. That's gone. There's no point grieving over it. The question now is much bigger, much broader than that. It is numbers, and those numbers are coming a lot faster than people think. People are noticing. So, thank you for noticing that about me. What I'd like to do is I'd like to begin with. I'd like us to, as you say, to look at what we can do about the situation we're in. But if I can start with 3 questions before then. The first question is, what is the problem? If we can define the problem, say what the problem is, and then are people alive to it? Are people awake? I think we know the answer to that. And thirdly, if people aren't, why are people not awake? So if we can go through these first, or if you can have a first stab at that. What do you think the problem is? Let's just put it in a few seconds.
Well, yeah. All right. Tell me if I'm being too basic, but I mean, the problem is I think we're living under the rule of people who are determined to end us as a nation. I'm not like, I would say I'm a nationalist sort of by default. I was never particularly headed for the idea of nationalism. It's not something that appealed to me all through my life. It's something that began to appeal to me when I began to feel like we're ruled over by hostile people. And I first noticed that after the last census 10 years ago, when the results came out, and I saw just on these really fringe websites, like a few people saying, if the Muslim population, that was what I was reading at the time, if the Muslim population keeps growing at this rate, they will take over, they will become the majority. And I was alarmed at that, but I was especially alarmed at the fact that nobody else seemed to care, which is, of course, part of what we're going to talk about here. But I couldn't believe that there was not a single MP. Well, I could believe it, but I was horrified by it. Yeah. That not a single MP seemed to care. And that was 10 years ago, and the rate of the rate of immigration has increased, obviously, very dramatically. And I think the problem is that we're living under people who see our existence collectively as something to be corroded, undermined, dissolved into a greater human mass, or maybe just, I mean, there's different motives for what we call anti-nationalism or globalism. Some are economic, some are probably racial hatred towards us, and various things. I mean, religious supremacism on some people's part, and all sorts of things. But on the part of the Tory government now, goodness knows. I mean, obviously, some of them are fanatical, sort of, I don't know, globalist libertarians. You could like globalist free marketeers like Dan Hannan and people like that. But that doesn't account for all of them. I don't think that accounts for Boris Johnson. I don't think that accounts for Theresa May. She was never a fanatical free marketeer. So that can't be the whole reason. But one way or another, we are under the control of people who are hostile towards us. And they're winning. They're absolutely having their way. So that's my sort of opening.
Yeah. I think I agree with that. I think that the main problem, cause of the problem, is not Islam. It's not even the numbers. That's the main symptom, and that's the most dangerous system, because it's not one that you can allow to end where it ends. You can't just stop it and let the loss lie where it falls. So I think that's why I focus on that, not because I have hatred for people who don't look like me. I think that's the most dangerous symptom. But yeah, I agree. I think the underlying problem is that we have people who rule us, or you could call them a governing class, the political class, who wish us harm. I think the roots of that are in their desire for power. And it isn't simply about the demographic invasion. It's also a whole lot of other things. Corroding us morally, ethically, corroding our sense of identity and who we are, our confidence in the face of them, corroding the idea of truth and reality. I think a lot of the trans debate is about that, the idea just a war on reality, a war on truth, and subject to that, and then on the basis of that, a war on wider morality, which gives people backbone. And I would say that is the people who have power wanting more power and finding that they can get more power by reducing our ability to control their power, by making us less powerful. So that the analogy I use is a wife beater. He gets married to one woman. That might give him a certain amount of power. He finds he can increase his power hugely, exponentially, if he grinds her down and reduces her to nothing. And I think that's what's going on. And the other side of that is that we're letting them do it. But the effect of that, there are a lot of effects here. I think, say, with the trans madness, that can be stopped with the loss lying where it falls. It isn't necessary for civilization to reverse. So to reverse transition people at the end of it, when we come to the end of the trans madness. I can think of a lot of other, if we've had our morality or our view of truth and reality done away with, we can recover that. But the demographic invasion, that's something you have to reverse, because if you don't, you pretty much don't have a civilization for demographic reasons, but also for cultural and civil reasons, which are underlain by ethnicity and race, I would say. So that's why I focus on that one. But anyway, I've taken longer than you, but
I strongly agree. I think it's important to emphasise that we can't just let this so many sort of centre right or soft or centrist commentators really do want to avoid. I think they're quite conscious about it. They want to avoid the question of reversing what's happened. Yeah. They're really frightened of that or something, or they think that is what marks you as a Nazi rather than just centre right. That's what marks you out as a racist or whatever. Yeah. That's the what's it called, the third rail or the red line, and they're wrong. I personally also just have a moral sense that people should, people in charge should not be allowed to do this to us. And this crime should not be allowed to stand. I don't know how much weight my moral feelings carry But
Yes,
I would add that. And yeah, it's horrific to watch evil people triumphing. It's just a disgusting, horrifying thing.
It is, and basically destroying an entire civilization, and by destroying a people, really. And
Yeah.
which I don't think it's an exaggeration to say the demographic invasion threatens to do that.
No, and I think it's intentional. I mean, how can they perpetrate it this hard without having ill feeling towards us, without malevolent intentions? How can they be so determined to suppress all resistance to it? I mean that's maybe that's to open up another question, actually, because the question of intentions perhaps we don't even need to address in a way. But but I in my mind it is important.
I've just recorded and not yet published. I've uploaded and not yet published a video dealing with that. Why they're doing it to us, and I just can't find an innocent explanation. I don't think there is one.
No,
just a question of power and wanting more of it.
Right. A lot of other people as well. I mean, I'm not sure about you, but I sense that you lean on the classical liberal or libertarian side more than statism, or more than, I don't know. You're not a socialist for sure, right? And like people who, for me, I have for 20 years been reading Austrian school stuff, and they are explicitly anti-government and anti-state. Yes. And so I'm quite accustomed to the idea that the state itself can be a problem, or usually is, and that the state itself can be hostile. It's not only a question of who's in charge, although who's in charge does matter as well. But I think a lot of people in our sphere being quite, well, in the sort of nationalist sphere, being quite pro-statist. A lot of people approve of national service, approve of having a state broadcaster, things like this. They are less inclined to come to those conclusions, and they're more inclined to think that it's a particular problem of who's in charge now. I would say politicians and civil servants and so on often have an interest in acting against the people they rule over, usually even because the people below them are a potential danger. Like we are, people, especially people with liberal or, I don't know, rebel ideas are a potential danger, because governments can be overthrown potentially.
Yeah, I'd say it goes a bit. It's not simply that they can be a danger; it's that they can also be a source of. They can give power to those civil servants and politicians, which is what those civil servants and politicians want. That's the dream.
Yeah, like enthusiastic obedience is better than recalcitrance, right? In their eyes. So they always have an interest in at least lying to us, or shaping, or misshaping the way we see things. I think they always have that. Plus, in more recent times, I don't know how recent, I don't accept this woke framing, this framing of like wokeness being the start of all our problems. I think like the current ruling elite, the formation of that, what formed it and when, that's a very interesting question, maybe too big to discuss now. But, like the people of 100 years ago or 150 years ago who ruled us may have been terrible people, but they didn't have this particular kind of evil. They weren't trying to destroy us. So that's an interesting thing as well, but maybe too much to discuss now.
Well, it wouldn't have been put up with then. I think it's relevant in that that there's who's that? Not E.B. Thompson, the historian A.J.P. Taylor. He said that up to the eve of World War I, your average Englishman's interaction with the state would have been limited to going to the post office. That would have been the only time you had anything to do with the state. The state it didn't have power over your life. And what you see today is a huge state that intervenes in pretty much everything. And I think that the result of that, the reason I think you get people saying, well, it's just this current crop of politicians, or it's just the wokeness, partly because it's safe and it means you won't get cancelled, you won't get censored for that, you won't get thrown off YouTube. But partly I think it's people cannot familiarize themselves with the concept of living without the state, without government. And I think that's reinforced by the existence of the welfare state. But perhaps that's sort of question number 3 coming along. Do you mind if I move on to question number 2? I think we've I think we more or less agree about what the problem is. Question number 2 is, are people awake to it? And if not, how deeply are people asleep?
Yeah, well, obviously, in order to give a clear answer to this one, we'd have to know people's minds, wouldn't we? But, well, just judging by what we do know of their actions, I mean, I think in terms of numbers, in terms of what proportion of the population are, I think if you ask the whole population, you'd get wildly different answers. I mean, there's been people who for years have been convinced that we're already a minority in Britain. There are plenty of people who think that. And there's all the way to the other extreme. There's people who like strongly deny that there's any large ethnic minority population even now, and deny that it'll ever be problematically large. But I started making videos a few years ago, I guess 4 years ago now, based on the idea that a lot of people live in denial, but if they're shown the right, shown the truth, they will admit it and then change. There are some people like that, but I think goodness knows what proportion, but a great many people want to avoid the truth, because if they accept it, then it's shameful to carry on in the torpid, complacent way that they already are. Like they don't want to have it shoved in their face that they're a coward or that they're selling out basically their own children in some ways. So I think there are millions of people, especially people who are busy with work, family, and kids, which is completely understandable. But a lot of those people, people who are locked into conformity in lots of physical or in lots of different ways, who've got a clear, strong interest in remaining conformist. Obviously, those are the most resistant, and they resist not only by not listening to us, but by completely avoiding us, like avoiding the question as much as possible. But most of them, I think, at some level still know there's something wrong, right? They will have seen their areas transforming. That is true of most people in the country now. So can't give a clear answer to that one, but what do you think?
Yeah, I would say people are very deeply asleep or not wanting to face up to it, because not wanting to think about what is unthinkable, which I think that ties in with what you're saying. I liken it actually to a little bit like living under occupation with a hostile government in place who's anti us, which I think that's the tendency with big organizations. I think if you have a small organization like the British state was, say, a century ago or a century and a half ago, the people who work in it generally serve the people that it's supposed to serve. The bigger the organization gets, the more it will tend to want to serve its own aims, its own needs. You see that with big companies. They'll start going on about stakeholders and employees' interests, which basically means share options for senior directors. And I think it becomes like living, although we're not living under foreign rulers, it is like living under foreign occupation. And I'd see an analogy with the German occupation of France in World War II and the attitudes of the French citizens. People like to bash the French, but I don't think we're behaving any better than the French did under that occupation. It was, and it's interesting how people will just keep their head down.
Sorry, when France was occupied by Germany, do you mean, or under its current?
When France was occupied, well, to give an example, I don't want to bash the French, but it enables us to take a step back because we're a step away from France. But one of the problems the Gestapo had in France was the sheer number of letters, snitch letters that were getting sent to them. So me saying, "Do you realise that Horus he's hoarding eggs? And go and investigate him." Or, "So I think this lady's having an affair with that married Gestapo officer." And the Gestapo, the number I've read is they received 3 million letters, and within a few years, and they couldn't plough through them. There were just far too many for them to deal with. So, and from one book I read, it said that the French were happy to go along with it until the shortage of garlic began, and that's what really started to kick them off. I suspect it's a bit more. That's a bit cruel.
A bit glib.
Yeah, a bit flip. But France did the level of just going along to get along was extremely high by French. I mean, they talk about the French, but then you look at it on the other hand, and you say, well, what could they do? The French resistance accomplished, sadly, very, very little during. There was nothing much that it could accomplish. Maybe a tiny, tiny bit, huge cost when come D-Day. But so what I bring it down to is, I would say, is that people put survival before civilization. That's where I describe it. We are evolved, wired to put survival first. And we developed civilization in order to enhance our survival, because civilization means a cohesive, formidable society that can defend itself, a society with backbone. And that makes that then gives rise to nice things like law and order, unifying culture, and a sense of identity, and that makes your civilization more durable, more resilient. But if civilization is threatened, people will still focus. They'll put survival above civilization. And currently, to talk out like you and I do, that puts our potentially financial survival on the line. We're taking risks for the purpose of civilization. We are evolutionary freaks in that regard. Evolutionary oddities.
I was gonna say, yeah, people have say 1910 in Britain didn't necessarily have to face that choice, right? They didn't have to choose between survival and civilization, and at some point it has become like that. Or if you want to defend civilization, you are forced to sort of reduce yourself to survival and little more, perhaps. Well, maybe I'm mixing the terms up too much, but I guess that maybe begins to answer the question, is that most people, even if they haven't thought about these things and don't think of themselves as political, they are still aware that to take certain political positions threatens their survival, or at least threatens most of their standard of living. Especially someone with a family, especially someone who works at a big corporation, because corporations basically transmit the same ideology as the state, it seems.
Yeah.
And in some ways are sort of incorporated into it. So people in those positions, the more you've got to lose, the less inclined they are to take a stand in favor of these, I guess, higher goods, right? Or these more precarious goods, I guess, right? Civilization. And so I guess this has probably been said before, but yeah, the regime's malevolence relies upon basically a constant threat to most people. Keep your head down, right? Keep your head down. Don't even bother thinking about it. But if you do think about it, the right choice for you, if you care about your family, your home, your job, your income, and everything, is just get back in line, right? And I think most people, even if they've not considered, they've never seen census results, or they've never thought about the small votes and all this rubbish, they still are aware of that. They're still aware that they're required to avoid certain topics and certain positions.
Mm.
And that has been extremely effective, right? That is really, really working. Even now, that's really working. So I guess most people are going to stay like that, which I guess you've argued, right? Most people are going to stay like that until that ceases to be the good option for survival, until conformity doesn't bring survival anymore, doesn't ensure the necessities anymore. So that's sort of what you've been arguing over the last few years, right?
Yes.
As in survival comes first, and most people see, conformity as the survival choice, and that will continue for as long as that's true.
Yeah, and so we get on to the third question. I think we agree that most people are not awake to this. They're not alive to this, and they're trying to avoid it, trying to go for red herrings like it's wokeness, it's the boat people, it's this bad politician, it's Boris Johnson, and not addressing the issue. Where I disagree with you a bit is I don't think it's simply fear of bad consequences, fear of getting in trouble. I think it's partly people quite like to conform. They like to be. They like to go on with to go along with general social mores, and the ethos of society. And that for most people that's morality and ethics, just going along to get along. But it goes like
for sexual reasons as well, right? For reproduction reasons as well. Like people who throw themselves out of the mainstream have just got far fewer women or men to choose from, right? As well. So.
Yeah. I did a video about white flight a few months, I don't know, a couple of years ago, and what it showed is people in the East End of London escaping the multicultural hellhole, and yet nothing but nice things to say about these people that they're moving house to get away from, and that they wouldn't say a word against them. I mean, hugging and kissing their Somali neighbours, oh, I'm going to miss you so much, all of that. And that's, well, I wonder how, I don't believe that, because they're moving to get away from them. So it goes very, very deep.
Those people obviously are aware of what's happening, at least at that level, right? And yet they're still maintaining the pretense of, I don't know, not having any animosity either towards the immigrants or to the people who brought them in. That says something fascinating. I mean, I wonder whether all people in all times and places would do that. Probably not. I think that is more a British or European thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it's like the forms of conformity still matter, even if your actions are going against them.
Yes.
That's interesting. I don't know how to explain it. I mean, but one book I would mention is Kevin MacDonald's book from a few years ago, which is, I think it's it was Individualism in the Western Liberal Tradition. He I think was trying to address that, and he comes to some conclusions. He says, some of this can't be explained, but very interesting book for anyone watching. I want to read that.
What's it about, if you don't mind my asking?
He's an evolutionary psychologist originally, and he's trying to explain why white people concern themselves with morality, even to the point where, right, so that, I mean, they try to concern themselves with morality even at the cost of their own group, right? Which is something that it seems only sort of leftish white people do in all of the world. There's no other group that does that. That they will literally openly call for the destruction of their own group because they see that as, MacDonald puts it in terms of making them part of a moral community, the community requiring that belief. If you read the whole book, you won't come to the end with a clear answer, but he makes some sense of it. And it's through a lot of evolutionary convolutions, going back to when people arrived from like Scythia and I don't know, prehistoric times.
Yeah.
So he's trying to make biological sense of it as well as sociological, I guess. But he's an evolutionary psychologist. So it's not a book you can summarize in one sentence, unfortunately. But the idea of the moral community and the need to be within that, the extreme hardship that comes from being outside of that's definitely part of the explanation. And I'm guessing those people who are hugging their Somali neighbors while basically fleeing from them, they're trying to signal that they're still part of the moral community at some level.
Yes.
Which is amazing.
Yes.
It's a hard phenomenon to understand.
And I think I would agree with his point to the extent that he's saying that sense of self-loathing being a compulsory element of the moral community is that's historically unique. That's an aberration.
Absolutely bizarre to most people's eyes. Like how, to a Vietnamese person looking at that, like what possible sense could they make of that?
Well, the way I make sense of it, we go on to the third question, which is why people are doing this. I think the big thing, the unprecedented thing, is the welfare state and the size of the welfare state. That has never been seen before since we crawled out of a puddle. We've never had that, and there has never been this idea that the state, it can look after you, it should look after you, and it will look after you pretty much from cradle to grave. And any problem that's normally seen as an adult problem, how to educate your children, how to take care of your parents when they're sick and dying, what happens when you get ill, what happens when you lose your job, all those things that relate to survival, they're taken away from you. and we're left kind of as sort of permanent pubescents, really. I mean, you see a lot of adults dressing as children. I think Mark Dyes often remarked how you get people in their 70s dressing like children, prepubescent children, and often having sort of similar tastes in music. And I remember Theodore Dalrymple saying he was in the waiting room of a doctor's surgery, and he watched a man in his late 70s who could barely walk, who was crippled with arthritis, but who looked like he was dressed like Keith Richards circa 1970. And that's the sort of the infantilizing effect of the welfare state. I think this ties into the idea of survival, because I think in a modern Western society, they all, basically European origin societies, have a big welfare state. And that is what you need in order to be able to survive, plus government management, supposed government management of the economy. And if you want to survive, you want that welfare to keep coming. And I think that keeps people complicit. It keeps people complacent and supine, because people will say, well, as long as the money keeps coming, okay, it's horrible out on the streets outside my home, I will just shut my front door and get away from it, which is what people tend to say when they're presented with horrible stuff in the streets. Well, I'll shut my door on that. I just won't say anything about it. I won't do anything. And I think it is people's being accustomed, our expectation of the welfare state and the state looking after us. I think that is that underlies this very strange complacency that's going on, and so that leads to what happens if the welfare state goes away. Now, do you think that's too glib or too simplistic or too cruel an analysis?
No, I'm inclined to agree, but I think it raises a couple of questions that, I mean, obviously, I don't know how many people actually use welfare, but are you talking about actually the use of welfare, or just knowing that it's there at least? You know, like, I mean, sorry.
Knowing that when I talk about the welfare state, I mean things like road repairs, street lighting, swings and slides in the park, the council building being open. So everything that's provided by the local municipal swimming pool, that kind of thing.
And I think one crucial thing is accident and emergency departments. That's one thing that a lot of people value the state for. Like that, and you know, a lot of people. If I say to someone, I don't think there should be an NHS, they're like, yes. I can see that they think, but that means there's nowhere to go when you're injured.
Yeah,
they're wrong to think that, but I mean that is the problem in a lot of people's minds. Like, so you have a broad conception of the welfare state. You're not just talking about unemployment benefits, disability benefits. You're talking about the state providing in general, being the sort of base provider of most aspects of life in a way, right?
Of survival, and also taking away the fear about those aspects of survival.
See, I think you're right. I think in your earlier videos, I think you used to also emphasize, you know, the provision of other necessities like sewerage, street lighting.
Yeah.
So when you say the welfare state, some people don't pick up on that. So that's good to clarify that. I agree. I think especially I would emphasize the psychological effect of it, because as we've said, like, not everybody is using these things. A lot of people do have the money to, if they needed to have some sort of communal street lighting or something, like if that was to go away. Some people do have the resources for it, but they don't have the habit of doing those things. They do have the habit of just expecting that to be done by the great monopoly, you know, the great provider sort of thing. And so I agree. I have a friend who thinks that when you say these things, you're just sort of attacking the ordinary folk for becoming weak and pathetic, being lulled and being lazy and sort of dependent in their mentality and so on. But I take it what you're really trying to do is say, what is it that keeps people complacent, even when it seems irrational for them not to be so? Is that roughly what you're doing? Like,
yes,
there's an obvious reason why people should be against the state, but you're trying to say why, given, you know, even having accounted for that. they're still not. They're still obedient.
Yeah. So if I can get defensive there for a while and say what I do mean. Yeah, that criticism applies to me. When I cut my finger, I go to my local doctor. I swim at the local municipal swimming baths. Do you understand? The road outside my home, the council, they put tarmac on that. I don't. And so a lot of it applies to me. And my view is that it's a bad bargain. I think ordinary folk will in fact be better off without the state. The welfare state will go, but the state will cease to impoverish you, which is what it's doing, which is, again, one of the reasons for mass immigration. It's to cut your wages, to make you poorer, and to make the rich richer. Things like housing costs, which are just going through the roof if you can find somewhere. And so it's called making the grits cost more and the grants cost less. So I would defend myself against I detest the English class system. I really dislike the English class system. So I'm sensitive to being portrayed as a stuck-up English Colonel Blimp. So, but anyway,
I think my friend sees you as more sort of like having absorbed a lot of sort of Thatcherism. I think that's roughly what he's saying. He thinks that you've got that sort of like, as you've never depended on these things. I mean, he's thinking of the welfare state somewhat more narrowly, but as you've not depended on these things, you don't know what it's like to be in danger, and therefore you don't appreciate how much of a safety net these things provide. I mean, my friend is more left-leaning than probably you or I, or more socialist-leaning in that sense. But yeah, I think that's what he's saying. He thinks that like some people just don't appreciate how important it is to have that safety net under us. I think that's his perspective. But that's a more general argument for welfare, which is not. You're actually talking more empirically, right? You're talking about what it is that lulls people, right?
Yes, and the way I would describe that is, I think it's the main problem is people going along with the herd. So I think the reason why people are conforming is they're conforming to the opinion of the herd. So the white flight lady who hugs her Somali neighbours as she's moving out, what she's doing is conforming to. She's showing that she is part of the herd. I think that's primarily what is going on. So the question then is, why does the herd have this opinion? Why is this self-loathing, self-abnegation? Why is that such an element of herd opinion? And what I think that you then have to look at welfare and the role that the welfare state plays in people's lives. Well, I think I would actually quote your friend. This sounds a bit insolent, but I would quote your friend as an example of that. He's saying it really means the world to some people to have that safety net there to rely and depend on. I would say, yeah, and that is being weaponized against you. What I would also say is it'd be nicer to be earned enough that you can pay for it yourself rather than having to stand in line for it, but and sort of feel beholden for it. But
sorry, I cut you off.
So I'd say people conform to the herd. There's willful blindness because people want to go along with the herd. You see that all the time. If you read, it's certainly been worse now in Stalinist Russia. In the 30s in Stalinist Russia, it was worse than it is today, I think. So just streams of intellectuals going out there and singing the praises of Stalin with the evidence right in front of their nose, like seeing starving people and reporting that it's heaven on earth in Stalin's Russia, and that willful blindness, I think that comes about because people are hypnotized by the idea of forming part of the herd. So then, what is it that makes the herd stampede in that direction? I think the primary thing is not so much fear of getting cancelled, fear of getting censored. It's the need to be provided for, survival needs, which are associated with what the state gives us, what the state provides for us. And that's primarily the welfare state and state provision, perhaps also supposed government management of the economy.
The other thing, yeah, I'd had one other thing that I've made a few videos about, and I think the myths of the Second World War play a role as well. In that, I think that's one of the first times in history where, well, no, maybe I'm wrong to say that, but it's one big instance in history where people were convinced to go along with a big lie, and I mean specifically the fact that whatever was wrong with the Germans at that time, the German regime at that time, we did ally with the Soviets, and the Soviets obviously carried out some similarly terrible stuff against Eastern Europe as they conquered, and many other. Obviously, before the war, the Soviets had already carried out massive crimes, as you said. In the 1930s, you had writers trying to tell people that it was heaven on earth, when it was the exact opposite. It's appalling. And it became, after some wars, perhaps you can get away with having been a dissenter, but it seems that all dissent against like sort of the moral rightness of the Second World War got wiped out quite viciously. You cannot find a book in almost any bookshop or library of just stories of people from the time who were against the war, who didn't want to be at war, right? Those voices are extinguished, and that is unnatural. So people also became quite accustomed to just living with lies. I think that's a factor as well. And also the specific aspects of that lie, of the sort of the legacy, the ideological legacy of the war, is that if you stand up for your people and you're European, you're a fascist, you're a racist, a Nazi, and implicitly you're trying to conquer the world and exterminate all the other races, right? And that, even though it's ridiculous, it really works. It really, really works. It still works on everyone who's not basically an avowed white nationalist. Or at least anyone who's got any political beliefs and who isn't directly against it. The only people who go against that are those who are prepared to get, punched and, and assaulted and stuff, pretty much, or who have to hide their identity the whole time they're doing it. And that is a factor as well. I think that obviously, immigration has built up, has increased ever since 1948. There was some before that as well, but let's say 48 is a big watershed with the Nationalities Act and then Windrush arriving the next year, right? There's been resistance against that from the start, but there would have been how much more? Twice as much, 5 times as much, 10 times as much, were it not for that use of, well, let's just say anti-fascism. Like if it wasn't for anti-fascism, the resistance would have been much larger and may have succeeded by now. You wouldn't just have an isolated figure like Enoch Powell or whatever. I mean, Enoch Powell was a pretty messy figure himself, so
yes, he was.
Yeah, not great resistance at all. But there would have been, it wouldn't have just been the BNP, which you could call a Nazi party, and it was founded by National Socialists, right? It really was. You'd have untainted opposition as well, and they would have been effective. How effective, I don't know. There would have still been some immigration, I'm sure, because the side that wants it is strong. But I think the ideological legacy of the Second World War is a big factor as well, and that's why I've tried to unpick and undermine that, in my own videos, because I think it binds people. I think it's like a lasso. It's like a psychological.
What I would question is that a cause of the current mentality or a symptom of it? I would say that is the self-loathing mentality, the anti-Western mentality, putting that on as clothing, adopting that as a badge. It could just as easily have gone the other way. Say France could have said, we've experienced invasion. We are never going to allow any foreigners to set foot on our soil ever again. It could have become very extremely nationalist. Churchill talked routinely about race. It was always our great island race, the white race, and it could easily have. The cult of Churchill could have gone that way. Probably, in some ways, would have been more appropriate going that way, since Churchill spoke so explicitly about it, and his thing was, we will resist invasion. We will fight here, there, and everywhere against invasion. So, I wonder. I would put that in the symptoms box or the manifestations box rather than the underlying causes and conditions box, which I think is still about self-interest of people, which is based on perceived self-interest of the herd, which is a horrible way to talk about ordinary people as being a herd, but you know what I'm saying.
Unfortunately, no, I try to I hate to believe it, but some people do willingly, it seems, behave like herd animals. So it's kind of unavoidable at this stage. I don't like to say it at all. Yeah, it's not nice. I don't want to believe that. I want to believe that everyone's got that individualist spark, not individualist, but individual, that they come to their own conclusions, but they don't. It's a sad thing to acknowledge, but it's true.
So here's a question then. So why bother? Why not leave them to stew in their own juice? Why do we do it?
Basically, because the forces ranged against us are organised. I think so. We it's the only way we can stand up against our enemies, whoever they be.
But if the herd is bringing it on themselves and getting what they ask for, why stand up for them?
Maybe there is no reason. Maybe we're wrong to try and ally with the nation in general. Maybe it is a mistake. It's something I think I've resisted considering, but maybe it is a mistake because maybe they are so determined to act as dead weight. And well, this I was thinking about this last night. The boomer generation. It's unfair to condemn them all because a lot of them are actually very fine. But the boomer generation are probably the most inert. Would you say? Like yes. Most inert. It's to act on them in any way is almost impossible. It's like
yes.
they're set on a course, and it seems since they were born, really, or since they were children, and it will not be altered. It's like the world has to shift around them for them to change.
Yes,
and it's maddening.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was the question? I've forgotten already.
Well, if the herd are just acting like a herd and getting what they deserve, why do we bother to do what we do supposedly for the benefit of the herd? Why not just let the herd go over a cliff?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the boomer generation in particular, as I think they are especially conformist, I think, you've identified and we've mentioned reasons why people are conformist at any time, especially European people, especially left-wing European people. They're extremely concerned with being part of the moral community and so on. So these like very old, ancient reasons, evolutionary. And there are ways in which all of humanity is conformist and herdish. And then we named the welfare state, that being a thing of sort of the last century. And I said the post-World War ideological order, which is of the last 80 years. But I can't remember what I was going to say.
Shall I give my answer whilst you're thinking?
Please do.
Right. What I would say, if we were talking about Afghanistan or Somalia, say Somalia or Afghanistan said, actually, we want to self-abnegate, we want to be invaded by a load of foreigners, and we don't care if we continue to exist as a nation. I would say, well, that's fine. You add nothing to humanity. I won't miss you. I won't notice. Good luck to you. You can do that. You have every right to do that if you want. Yeah. But if you look at, and you wouldn't miss them. The way I put it is, say, if the Palestinian people, or if the maybe that's a contentious example. Well, let's say if the Afghan people, if the mothership came down from planet Zog and kidnapped every Afghan person.
Sorry, that's a bad example. That's the planet Zog as well. So another planet, because that relates to Israel as well.
Oh, sorry, right. I think of the Superman movie. So planet X. Okay, and it goes up to planet X, and they all get anal probes performed on them in the mothership on planet X, right? And so they're all getting kidnapped. I wouldn't notice. No one would notice. All you'd notice is that world aid budgets would be a little bit less. They become a bit more plentiful. There'd be more aid money around. So, but if I look at European people, particularly, I think English people, every people has a right, and I think it is a good thing to have their own nation state, and to think of themselves as a people who are bound together with an identity and a connection to a patch of soil, but a long historical connection to a patch of soil, which almost enters DNA in a way, as it would over generations. I think that is a right. But I think that European people, and particularly I think my own people, the English people, who I don't always like, we have the duty to do that because of what we provide to the world. I think our contribution to the world is absolutely unparalleled, off the charts. The most entrepreneurial people, probably historically the most decent people, the people who established the principle on earth that slavery is a bad thing, for instance. And what I put it down to is we have this belief in freedom, and it's almost it has been called as kind of a genetic, inbred belief, freedom under law, because we're not naive. We realize that there are bad people who need to be contained, and that law should be morally defined, morally thrashed out. So those three things under law that is morally defined. And that tradition, once you see states or peoples copy us, pretty historically, what has tended to happen is any nation that decides they want to suck up to us and crawl to our example does well. They get profitable. Look at Singapore with Lee Kuan Yew. And any nation that decides to hell with you, you're racist, we hate you. Any nation that decides that, like Pakistan, goes like they did after independence, they go through decades and decades of hell, just near hell, really. And that good example that we provide, I think that means we have a duty to survive, as well as the right to survive, and as well as it being a good thing for nations and people to survive as a nation. So I think that's the reason. That's the reason to worry. And I think partly also picking up on what you said, I just think the opposition is so evil. It's you can't not resist them.
Right. Yeah. To be to be middling and to be like sort of on the fence in a time like this just seems perverse to me. Yeah, I agree. Like that. I mean, it is important. England, in particular, is important. England is like, when people, it's perhaps a bit of a sweeping phrase, but England built the modern world is something I've heard people say. Totally. So much truth to that. Yeah, there's so much substance to that. It's not something even I appreciated like 5 years ago. So I'm only a shallow nationalist, but the more I learn about history, the deeper it gets. And again, and even then, I remain just a nationalist by default. Just don't destroy us, Why destroy us? And it makes you wonder if because it seems as though, we have this problem of globalism, and I do see that countries all around the world now are being preached, gay pride. There's like Pakistani immigration going into Japan now, and Romania and Poland and all these places that often people think of as sites of resistance to globalism. There's probably nobody has the power to resist, at least on their own. And so it is a problem for the whole world. But I do think that Europe and America and Australia, the white places basically, have been specifically or been targeted more aggressively than everywhere else, or certainly with a first target of anti-nationalism. And it makes you wonder, do the people perpetrating this, to the extent that they're thinking ahead, do they just want to rule over a really dismal, useless world, a world of misery and just ugliness? Because that is what will happen if they shatter Europe and European civilization. That is what they will have. They will have a crap world. It will be horrible to rule over. It's like they don't care, or that is one indication that there isn't really anyone in the cockpit, that it's more like the sort of cathedral idea, if you've come across that.
No, I don't.
Well, sort of the idea that basically what's happening is emergent phenomena rather than driven by intention.
Oh, right. Yes.
Yeah, which I'm beginning to become more persuaded of. I think there is some evidence for that. But I think there's malevolence as well. I remembered what I was going to say before, just about I sort of named the sort of longer term and shorter term reasons for conformity and complacency.
Yes.
One thing I would say is that when the boomer generation dies out, which I don't look forward to because that's my parents and loads of fine people. When they do, however, I suspect there may be a sea change. I mean, well, except it won't all happen in one moment, will it? But I mean, that's presuming they are beginning to die now, right? But they are particularly inert. I think the generations that follow them do not have the same deep trust in the state or in the BBC. I think the BBC is very important, but they don't have the same deep trust in the state. They don't think that no matter what happens before their eyes, the state is ultimately must be looking out for them. I think that is specific to the boomer generation. So 20 years hence, we may find a lot more political contention. But of course, 20 years from now, we ain't going to be much of a nation at all. We're going to be a hated remnant. Perhaps. So, or at least embattled. We may still be sort of 50 or 60 million people, but we'll be embattled and we'll be surrounded. And well, not just surrounded, we'll be dispersed as well. So,
yeah.
We can't. So I guess the only conclusion to draw from that is that much as the boomers expiring might help, it's not going to help. It's not going to be soon enough.
No,
bleak thing to say.
I would say people under 30 are more stupid from my observation. I know very few people under 30 who've got any brain at all on these matters. To the extent, I used to have near me a cafe that was near a university, and if I was being lazy and couldn't get on with my work, I would go and work in that cafe because I knew there'd be so much stupid conversation going on, usually very conformist and liberal left wing, that I'd say I've just got to get on with my work because I can't listen to such a constant undertow of stupidity, and so I'm not sure one generation to the next. I think it's social factors. Maybe it's because I got the blinkers on about the welfare state being the underlying.
Well, you'll notice that I didn't say anything positive about the younger generation. It's just that I think that they're less dependable servants. Perhaps they're more like. Maybe I'm wrong about that as well. Maybe I'm wrong. Yeah. But no, there's a specific level of or a specific kind of trust. Like so many things came together at once in the sort of 40s, and it was. And I really think the BBC, growing up with Auntie always being there to inform you about the world. Yes. I really think that matters a great deal. That and A&E departments, they're two crucial things. And water coming out of the tap, obviously, is another one, but that is done by a private company. So, a nominally private company, because these big corporations, as we say, I think they are to be thought of as in alliance with the state anyway. So,
totally, revolving door.
Yeah, and the same ideology is completely present in both.
Yeah.
I think the expiring of the boomer generation will have a dynamic effect at least, but also at such a late stage in our plight. So,
I think it will correlate. Maybe we'll never know because I think around that time that's when things will break down. But
I mean, as we come to I assume we're coming to the question of financial. Okay, go ahead.
What I'd like to talk about is what I suggest is if I go through how I think it's likely to get solved. I think you agree with some aspects of that, and then if I point out specific questions, weak points in my own argument, and we can thrash that out. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because just to remind people, hello, if you're listening, thank you for joining. In case you haven't seen any other of my videos, you haven't had the stamina, I don't blame you. What I think the way this gets solved, I think, is not through voting our way out of it, but we collapse our way out of it. I think the state authority will collapse. I think it will do that through not because of the invasion, but for financial reasons, the debt bubble bursting, basically. When that happens, I think we will get a very severe recession, and when that happens, I think the welfare state will get cut, and then I think you get a feedback loop. So when state finances go down enough that it affects welfare enough that ordinary people start to think in passionate terms about state finances, then things join up and you get feedback loops. I think people will riot. Cut the state, cut the welfare provision by about 20%, people will riot. I think that will then reduce the authority of the state, which in turn reduces the income of the state, and then that it reduces the size of the welfare state, which means people will riot more, which will in turn reduce the wealth of the state. So you get that feedback loop, crushing the authority of the state, effectively killing the idea of a social contract where you accept the authority of the state because the state provides these things for us. I think people think that welfare and state management of the economy, that's why we vote. That's what we vote for. When that happens, when that breaks down, I think people will reject the authority of the state and the state will collapse. So economic collapse followed by political collapse. And then what I think you'll get is we will have to rely upon our own metal to provide for our own security. The breakdown of the state, that's easy to say, it's nasty. Crime goes through the roof when that happens, or certainly in other countries that have a history of that, particularly in Latin America or say in Russia or Eastern Europe. The main problem of the breakdown of the state is that crime rockets. People, we need order, we need security. Now, I don't think it's, some people say that what I'm saying is the state will break down, the welfare state will go, and a lot of the foreigners who come here will say, there's no welfare for me, I'll go back to where I came from. I don't think that will happen. What I think is likely to happen is we will seek security by collectivizing as individuals on an opt-in, opt-out basis. So not voting for the overarching state, that's gone. That's no longer there. So individually, joining a club that provides for security, a club that says there are these rules, you promise to obey these rules if you're a member, and other people will obey these rules as regards you, or other members will obey the same rules as regards you. So that means you're each covered by legal protection, and we have an enforcement mechanism that's paid for by subscriptions. Basically, like joining a club, like joining a Skittles club or a cricket club. You obey the rules in the pub when you join your Skittles club, and those rules can get enforced by the barman or the doorman. So and when that happens, I think that will settle out very hard along ethnic lines. The reason I think that is because I don't think people will trust foreign populations to share the provision of security. I would not trust a lot of those foreigners because they're so highly criminalized. Secondly, I wouldn't want to have to pay high subscriptions to police the criminality of highly criminalized foreign populations. So I would join an all-English one. And a lot of people would say, of course I wouldn't do it. But if you say, well, it's a tenth of the price, because sub-Saharan Africans tend to have criminal conviction rates that are about 10 times our criminal conviction rates. Are you willing to pay for that as well as being subjected to the crime? I think even very left-wing people would say, well, actually, no, I will join the exclusive English area if they're entitled to do so. So I think financial breakdown, political breakdown of the state, we then provide security for ourselves along voluntary opt-in, opt-out lines, and that will inevitably settle out along quite hardened ethnic lines. And I think what the foreign populations will find is being excluded means they go into terrible circumstances. They're excluded from welfare, excluded from employment, excluded from basic services, gas, electricity, water, drainage. That's life-threatening. I think at that point, they won't be able to survive in those conditions. And then they will be amenable to a free ticket home, a free ticket back to their lands of ancestry. Now, that is the way I see things working out. But it depends upon, the first thing is the breakdown, is financial economic breakdown, which causes breakdown of the state. Now, I appreciate what I'm saying to a lot of people, it must sound certainly unfamiliar. I would say nuts, probably. The pipe dream of an anarcho-nationalist or an anarcho-capitalist, whatever. And what I want to do is to try and pick holes in what I'm saying. I could be wrong, so I've tried to isolate the weak points, and I'll see if Horus. Well, let me know if you think the weak points are weak points. Let's take them one at a time. Well, I'll deal with them. I'll just say what they are, then we can go through them one at a time. So, is an economic breakdown a realistic prospect? Will people really lose it if the welfare state gets substantially cut back? Will the state really break down in those circumstances, or will it just retrench itself and get up again? If the state breaks down, will people search for lawful ways to find security? Will they simply submit to warlords, soccer hooligans, drug lords, theocrats? And if English people make law for themselves, will they really do it in a way that excludes the bulk of foreign populations? If this happens, will conditions in the foreigner-dominated enclaves, will they really get that bad? And finally, will those people in those foreigner-dominated enclaves, will they say, no, I'd rather die than leave? So will they stubbornly dig their heels in and stay no matter what? So, Horus, if I can do the first one, is an economic breakdown as opposed to just another credit crunch like we had before, which kind of came and went. Is it a realistic prospect, that economic breakdown?
Well, another financial panic, I think, has got to be treated as a near certainty. Whether it amounts to something worse than, say, 2008, I think it's very likely. So, because the debt problem was basically just shifted up to the sovereign level, the level of, the state holds these debts instead of what was previously corporations. But now, obviously, like, the states have taken on those debts, and there's still huge corporate and personal debt as well, right? So yeah, the problem is bigger. So presumably, the next crisis moment will be more severe and harder to deal with. So the question comes down to: do they have, if not a plan, or do they at least have something they can use at that moment? Say that happens. I reckon that will happen in the next 5 years. The next panic. Do they have a plan? And my answer to that has to be, I don't know. It hinges on that, I think. If there's some way, I think the only way that they can survive the next one without some massive contraction of the money supply, I guess, is by seizing what is currently privately held capital of kinds that they've never done before. I think on the Dangerfield stream, I suggested one way to prolong the current kind of rubbish but workable system is to seize people's homes, or to seize a stake and then maybe grow that stake. Seize 10%, 20%, 40% of equity in everyone's homes, which sounds amazingly drastic and unpopular. But if people are told, look, you've got to give us 20%. Do you want to starve? You've got to give us 20% equity in your home. Otherwise, we're all screwed. We're all in this together, all that.
Yeah.
It hinges on whether that will suffice, and whether they're prepared to do that, and whether they can do it, in the moment, during the panic, or at least to an extent to stop the panic, to restore confidence momentarily. Because that's what happened in 2008, right? It's not actually a solution at all. It's just a stopgap, but that stopgap has held for the last 15 years. So, quite amazing. There's going to be another panic. I'm convinced of that.
Yeah.
They're going to resort to things that are outrageous. It's a question of whether it will work. What they did in 2008 was outrageous. Right?
Yeah.
Absolutely abominable, and yet they did it. And I just sat there and went, oh my God. I thought we were coming to some sort of reckoning, and no, they prolonged it and made it worse. So it hinges on whether they can stop the gap. And I think they either can't, or, well, I really don't know. I think they will try and seize people's home equity, and they'll try and use that equity to force them to accept refugees as well. I think they may, this is a very long shot, but they may resort to, well, some people have suggested that they'll resort to central banks holding Bitcoin or gold.
Yeah.
So a sort of a semi-reversion to the gold standard, or a new Bitcoin standard. But that doesn't solve the problem, because that's hard money. And hard money is exactly what they tried to get away from by ending the gold standard. So if they did resort to that, they would also have to shrink the state anyway. They would have to shrink their spending anyway. Because it's hard money. The whole reason to get away from hard money was to overspend perpetually.
Yes.
And that's why we are partly why we are where we are. On the other hand, my confidence in this line of argument is a little bit knocked, because when we did the last stream, and also on a few other occasions, I've got a friend who has worked in banking and stuff, and he said, "You're a collapse bro. Like this is just a thing. This is just a mistake that loads of people have made. You're either predicting or hoping for a collapse."
Yeah.
Because you just don't understand. There are ways of adapting. There are ways of just drawing in new capital without it being a problem. However, the explanations for that did not convince me, and I've not managed to talk to that person at length about it. So, as it stands, I think a recession of the state has to come about. I think that will come about. But I guess the bit I would dispute is whether it's going to work out well. I think there will be a recession of the state, as I call it. There'll be a panic, and there'll be a crummy solution that keeps the same people in power, but with much less resources to draw upon. And therefore, yes, various things like the NHS and other huge spending items will recede by necessity, and quite abruptly as well. And it'll be horrible. However, I think this is anticipated to enough of an extent by the people in power that they realise the danger they're in if that happens, and therefore all their resources, all their thinking will be based around staying in power and stopping us getting the autonomy that we need to survive, and which could threaten their existence. So I think it's probably going to be like much more messy, and probably the people being this is maybe a bit of a MAGA boomer take. I don't know, like sort of a I don't know what the word is, but the idea of all the people being imported now on so-called small boats, they probably are being prepared to be some sort of force to be used against us. I think that is plausible. I've seen the smug look on some of their faces in my town.
Yeah.
It's as though they are being armed and trained. I mean, I don't know. I have no idea, but I suspect that they have been told that they've got some role. They've got some important role. It's really strange to say, but I think this is anticipated to some extent. I think the Davos crowd, people like Klaus Schwab, are deluded idiots. I think they don't get what's going on at all. I think the CBDC is not going to solve their problems at all. It doesn't solve the soft money, hard money problem, and the number of units problem. They're idiots, but there are also harder, cleverer people probably, and they probably do have a plan, and it probably does involve some kind of, I don't know, like slavery or something. They maybe intend to make us some kind of slaves. So it's a question of, can they survive? Can the existing bastards, can they survive the panic? And I think they can. So maybe you're wrong there. I'm not sure.
The evidence that I produce, if I say why I think it's likely to happen, I'm painfully aware of what your the guy your acquaintance said. I'm painfully aware of what he said about people being collapse bros, because about for the last 2 decades I've been hearing people saying it's all going to collapse, people won't put up with this, in 6 months' time it's all going to collapse. And well, that was 20 years ago, and it still hasn't. And there are, you can see these people on YouTube, they're still smiling. Oh yes, buy this, that, and the other off me, and attend my course, and it's all going to collapse next Tuesday, and they're still doing it. And I hope I don't sound like that. Just as timescale, I think this breakdown collapse is somewhere around 2030, either a bit before or a bit after. That's when I would. But I mean, I'm a fool to try and put any date on it at all. The reason why I think collapse is more likely than a cunning plan to enslave us, which some people might have, is partly because of the stupidity of these people, and I think it's an unthought conspiracy, but also from historical evidence. The historical evidence from the fall of the Soviet Union, the hyperinflations in Central Europe during the middle of the last century, and the breakdowns in Latin America, where you have military takeovers. The common element is that the annual state deficit reached 20% of GDP. So when that happens, that seems to be almost like a magic number where, or as one Soviet economist put it, that is the point at which society becomes ungovernable. And
sorry, could you say the ratio again, please?
Yeah. So when the annual deficit of the state authority, so its yearly debt on its credit card, hits 20% of GDP. Now, currently in Britain, it's about 8.5%. I think in the States, it's about 6.5%, maybe nearly 7%. Depends on which estimate of deficit you go on. I think it's 1.7 trillion as against 25 trillion GDP. I think that's about. I can't do the maths in my head, but when you get to that point, it's not simply that government now has to wheel out Plan B and has to bring out the army and its army of hostile migrants. It's that things just break down. The way I put it is the window cleaner washer won't clean the windows of the council offices unless he has money up front. So suddenly governments, instead of living on debt by rolling over debt, suddenly they're living hand to mouth. No one's going to lend them anything, and you won't mend the council van. The garage won't mend the council van without money up front because they know the council's going broke. You just seem to get a shift in mentality when that happens, and I think it's more than likely. The reason I think we could hit that point where annual deficit reaches 20% of GDP is partly we're about a third in Britain. We're about a third of the way there already by my maths. But when you get these credit crunches, you need massive injections of capital, and they can't do what they did last time. What they did last time was to print money and make it available for banks to lend into the economy. And that was bailing out the banks, and also government taking on debt and using it to buy toxic assets off the banks. But if they can do that, whilst interest rates are very low, that will work.
Right.
But interest rates are high because inflation is high, and inflation is high because a lot of them, they broke that pattern during the pandemic. They didn't just print up money and allow banks to borrow it. They printed up money, lent it to government, who gave it to people to spend, stimmy checks, and furlough checks. And that is what has created the current inflation, which is really bad in our country because we did it especially badly. It's not known, and it's very hard to find on the internet, but the Bank of England printed up and gave the UK Treasury $500 billion, a temporary measure. So it wasn't in the normal way where you say we're lending this money, it's a debt, it has to be accounted for. They printed it up and just, quotes, the word was, advanced it to the government. So that's printing and spending. That's Weimar Republic. That's what the Weimar Republic did.
The most direct way of inflating the money supply, and which they wouldn't usually resort to, right?
Yeah, which no central banker wants to be tarred with that brush ever, and they did it. $500 billion, 380 billion pounds worth. Now, when you do that, you get runaway inflation. Then when you get runaway inflation, suddenly your debt burden, well, within a year, I think the interest rate's gone up 4 times, I think 4 or 5 times. I mean, it's huge, historically unprecedented steepness of the curve. And when you do that, suddenly your deficit rockets because you've got this huge debt that was costing you 1% a year. Suddenly it's costing you 5 or 6% a year. So I think it is with a big credit crunch where a lot of people are begging for government money because they're going to starve. They're in real need and they depend upon the state. Then it's easy to see that 20% limit getting hit. And then the historic evidence is simply that government, it doesn't come out with a Blofeld plan. It just crumbles. It falls over. People, civil servants stop going into work that day. Council workers think, I'm probably going to get spat at or assaulted. I won't go into work. And then it just breaks down. So that's...
Yeah, I think just for the benefit of people watching, there's one thing to emphasise there is that of the UK's budget, which is something like the best part of £1 trillion a year, I think, the government budget. Last time I looked, which was about 5 years ago, £50 billion a year of that was just interest repayment. Debt interest payments. And that will be much higher now because the debt's bigger and the interest rate on the government borrowing is much higher than back then. So that may be 100 billion a year or something. And that's Britain. and yeah, as you're saying, like that's just one element of it as well. Yeah, because what I kept asking my friend, and I just never got a clear answer, was who is going to lend the amounts necessary to stop the next gap. It's a much, much bigger gap, and the ability to lend is more doubtful than in 2008. Britain's credit rating was, America's credit rating with one of the agencies was downgraded a week or two ago, right?
Yeah.
From AAA to AA. That's nearly unprecedented. That's very rare or unprecedented, maybe. And that's America. That's the strongest of all. That's the strongest government, the strongest borrower in the world, right?
Yeah.
The people, like, yeah, no entity on earth has a more ability to borrow than the US government, as far as I know.
Yeah.
And they've been downgraded from the highest rating.
Yeah.
Yeah, which they certain politicians angrily protested against. Yeah, I am yet to find anyone who has an answer to this. Who's going to lend the money needed to create, whatever they call it, a firewall, or at the next panic? And I don't have an answer yet. So that is why I do agree with your theory. Yeah, and I guess if you're right, that invalidates what I said about the powers that be being able to recruit a big army against us because they won't have the money for that.
No. The armies like to be paid,
and I'm sure they don't mind being paid in women's flesh and maybe like human food or whatever for a while. But that's not going to. They do want something they can take home as well. They do want something they can keep. Yeah. So money matters. This is one sad thing about the time we're living in, is that a lot of people have been convinced that money is meaningless.
Yes.
And it's not. It's not at all.
No.
And that's. I mean, I said this on Dangerfield's stream as well. Is that one way you can tell that at least a lot of the people in charge are actually bonkers and don't have a plan and are stupid and deluded, is that some of them seriously believe in modern monetary theory.
Yes. Yeah.
Which just says that money doesn't. Yeah, it just really doesn't matter how much money you create. No, it does. It does, and it does matter how much you borrow. There is a limit. So the answer of my friend was all about, well, there's new ways of lending, there's new consensus mechanisms for a big lending arrangement and stuff. But I need something more specific, because I don't see who is going to lend. Who lends to the states currently? It's people who buy government bonds.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Is there any other way of lending to the state?
Your own central bank. So the central bank prints up money and then buys a government bond, and that. The problem with that is the debts have got so big, everyone assumes that debt's never going to get repaid, it'll just get rolled over. So when in the pandemic, America, the Federal Reserve printed up dollars, bought and lent it by buying an American bond, a treasury bond, and then the American government spent that money in society. That was inflationary. That was, although it was structured not to be modern monetary theory, that's effectively what it was. It was just money sprayed into the economy, and that caused the inflation. I've heard it described as modern monetary theory has been tried and has failed, as we've seen. In Britain, what you had was they cut out the bonds, so they just printed up the money and gave it to government. That if you get a big crunch, no one's going to buy a government bond. It's
right.
So just
for anyone watching, that's what it means when the credit rating is downgraded. It's a diminishing inclination to buy government bonds or to lend to the state. The same thing. And so to anyone watching who can't follow all the deficit, debt, inflation, bond talk, right? Just basically what we're saying is the government has several problems at once, and every possible solution that we can imagine here exacerbates at least one of those problems, and they're all tied together. So exacerbating one exacerbates the others as well. Every potential solution exacerbates the problem further, as far as we can see, right?
Yeah. As far as I can see, every solution they have is part of the same downward spiral. Printing more money creates more inflation, means they've got more debt. They have to print more money to cover those debts. And
also, if there were, say I've sort of implied that there might be, most of the people in charge in most of the countries are idiots. They don't realize what problems they're racing towards, and they're going to be, high and dry when the panic comes. Even if there is a cleverer you know, like maybe the people at the Bank of International Settlements or something, somebody somewhere does have a plan and they'll roll it out. You would think we'd have some evidence of that. You'd think there'd be some sort of smoke to that fire. There'd be some sign that those people exist. Otherwise, what we're saying is that, say, come 2028, there's a panic. Everyone's aware of it. It's in the news. You know, there's those pictures of traders all crying and stuff. Just out of nowhere, with some never before mentioned force is going to appear and say, "Here's the solution," and that's going to be imposed on the world. That does seem rather unlikely, doesn't it?
Yeah. I think the only one I've heard people mention is that the IMF will come in, but the IMF gets its money from its member states, like America, like Britain. If they're broke, then the IMF has no money. No, I don't think there is another plan. I don't think it occurs to people in power to. I think they think, well, by that time I've already been thrown out of the window, so it doesn't matter.
So yeah, if it was the IMF, if the IMF or some other global body like that had a solution, maybe they could create a new currency just all of a sudden and say, we'll issue as much of that as everyone needs. But then does India, Russia, China, Iran all go along with that all happily? I doubt it.
Right? No, I don't think.
No. So yeah, I defy anyone listening. I'll send this to my friend later. I defy anyone listening to tell us, where does the solution come from? Because if not, you have to accept that there is going to be this fairly severe collapse in the ability of the state to do most of what it does now. And those things that it does now are, you know, like the current order relies upon it. But someone has to explain, if they say we're wrong, someone has to explain where the new lending comes from, where the continued ability of the state to do what it's doing now comes from. I still, after years of trying, after watching everything I can related to this, I still can't figure it out. Where is that next solution? So I agree with you that there is going to be this breakdown of the ability to spend, at least, and we may differ on what comes after. I realise that's only, I've only answered the first part of the question. But
well, that brings us along nicely to the next question. You went very smoothly, a nice segue into the next one.
If you say it's a segue, that stops it being a segue.
But yes. So anyway, we're gelling into the next section. If anyone watching this wants to put questions in the chat, I'll try and include those, because you might have better ideas than me. You might be able to rubbish what I've been saying. So give me a hard time if you can. Come up with the killer question. But are you okay to keep going for a while, Horus?
Yeah. I can keep going a bit more.
Super. Now, the next question, which you segued us into, is: will people really lose it if the welfare state gets substantially cut back? So, do you think by losing it, will they lose their temper and just riot and go nuts?
I strongly agree with what you say about the need for law. As in, if people are deprived of law and they feel like they're in a sudden anarchy, they will look for it urgently. They will look for some sort of law, source of law, and like the physical imposition of law. And in general, most people will simply, just out of the ability to communicate, most people will tend towards people of their own group. English people will gravitate towards an English lawgiver. I think that is right. Even locality will probably matter as well. Even dialect will probably matter. I can't see that, because just taking the example of there's loads of black people where I live now, but I can't read black people's faces. I can't tell whether they're friendly or not. Sometimes they are when they look angry and things like this. With English people, I can look at them and almost always get right roughly what sort of demeanor. I can tell a lot from their demeanor, and so sorry, go on.
Horus, if we come to that question in a minute as to who we trust when we're dealing with security, if I question, so we might be getting ahead of ourselves a bit. I think my view is: will people lose it if the state goes broke and the welfare state gets cut back substantially? Do you think people are going to lose it, or will people just accept it and say, "Oh, that's a shame. Oh, we'll have to keep going"?
I guess my first instinct is that they will try and make the best of it. They will try and say mustn't grumble, and this is just how things are now. And people seem to avoid rioting under almost all circumstances in this country. So rioting, I don't expect, but I do think people will start to adapt their behaviour. Like, give us an example of what people are losing first, like the ability to go to hospital if they're injured.
Let's say hospital services get cut back by a third.
Well, I think people will put up with a lot in that area. I think the law thing is more important, but yeah, in terms of services, what people think of as services, state monopolies, as I would say, people have already put up with a massive degradation in the NHS. Like it was a lot better when I was a kid. I'm sure there was problems, but you would get seen quickly. Now people are used to avoiding GPs if they can help it. So that's a sign of how much people will swallow to avoid, just getting political or whatever. So I think people would swallow a lot more of that. So when it comes to health, but if people feel threatened in terms of they can't just sit quietly in their house and be safe, that is a big deal. That will agitate people, I think. So when it gets to that stage where there's an observable breakdown of order, that will change how people relate to each other, I think.
Yeah. I think I agree with you. I think if there's a 20% cut in across the board state provision, that's going to cause serious social troubles. But I can't be certain of that. I'm just that's a thumb in the air judgment. People might just say, well, it's taking 20% longer for my roads to get mended. The street lights are 20% dimmer, and my rent subsidy is 20% lower.
I have to go fill up my bucket of water at a tap outside because I'm not getting water. That could be a thing.
People might, again, then you sort of get disease after. But or if people might put up with that. What I think people can't put up with is what you do get when you get the breakdown of the state authority, which I think will sort of come in an accelerating spiral at some stage if the state goes broke, is the problem of crime. That's the immediate problem. So a few coppers stay on by pocketing traffic fines. That's the classic one. But usually most coppers go away. A lot of coppers find they can form criminal gangs. This is experience from Eastern Europe and Latin America, especially Latin America. So coppers find they can they join home invasion armies or kidnap gangs where there's a lot of money, and crime suddenly becomes rampant. And that, I think, scares people. And people think, well, I can't get away from it. I can't feel safe in my home. I've got to do something about it. I think that is, that's the thing that I think will cause people to lose it or create a real shift in people's, an earthquake in people's expectations of life, where they expect security to come from. And so I think that probably is the critical issue is crime, which I think you identified.
Yeah, I think that's the tipping point. Is when people feel acutely unsafe. That is a tipping point, I think. Yeah. Degradation of services is not such a big deal. A lot of people are putting up with that already. So that's. But safety and the chance of just someone just breaking into your house, raping your wife in front of you or something like that. It's just. Or I did think of another thing though in terms of services. There are some services that if they're interrupted or lost, that people will panic, and that's like, say if you start having brownouts of electricity or just like a loss of Wi-Fi, like loss of internet, and people who rely on the internet, which people do heavily now. If they find that they can't. If they rely on the internet just for their childcare arrangements or whatever, it's like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? One of my kids is at school, the other one's here. I need them both, and they start having those kind of panics. That will radicalize some people, I think, as well.
I would say that part of the feedback loop for anger. What I have in mind is when I did a mosque busting case years ago, one of the fellas who helped me, one of the local guys, he had worked for one of the armed services and he'd been involved in the disaster or emergency planning section. And I said, so what are you planning for when things break down or if things break down? And he said, oh, it's really easy. It's really simple. All the forces of law and order, so soldiers and police, just retreat to the hub That's all that happens. So, like your burglary, we don't pick up the phone. They just so Whitehall, Houses of Parliament, maybe the local council office or whatever the hub is. He didn't. I didn't press him because I guess it might have been secret. But your home invasion, not our business. And home invasion that's where a gang come in, and maybe they do rape your wife in front of you. More likely, they smack you over the head till you're bleeding. They hold guns to your children's heads. They smack your wife, and they say, "Where's your money hidden? Where's your money hidden?" And your wife will scream at you, saying, "Just tell them where the money is,"
Right.
because they've got guns to your children's heads, and you'll be bleary, and your wife's screaming at you, and you'll think, "I'll just hand over the money," because they know it works. And if it doesn't, they probably will rape your wife or threaten to. And people, if it doesn't happen to you, you would have heard stories of that. And that, I think, that's not a fear that people can live under. So I think that is what is likely to cause people, as I say, to lose it if the state breaks down.
Yeah, or even if people start hearing that is happening in new areas, like in rich areas, like even rich people aren't safe. That can that could be a signal that things are really bad. Some people really will put up with things happening against themselves, but they're scared when it happens against the rulers or the privileged. It's crazy, but
how sad.
Yeah, it really is. Really is. I laugh, but out of despair, But yeah, I think. I can't. No, sorry. Go on.
Shall I go to the next question?
Go for it.
Now, let's suppose the authority of the state breaks down. People don't accept it, maybe for fear of crime or because they're not getting what the state promised them. If the state does break down, so the state's broken down, and this is what I need to emphasize, because sometimes people say, yeah, when the state breaks down, then won't the government come along and put us all in prison? No, the state has broken down. When the state breaks down, the state is a dead parrot. It has ceased to be. Okay, so
what if it only breaks down 50, 60, 70% though, and it's still able to muster physical force?
Yes, that. Well, to do that, you'd need to have the army on your side. You need political. Well, let's say. Let's deal with that now. So, if I put my point of view, if that happens, then the state, its services go. It's not providing anything, and they say we've failed you. We can't provide all the nice things, and we can't protect you. But at least we've got the army, okay? And people, and well, I'm no good when I'm up against an assault rifle. So people accept that authority. And what happens there? You'd have to pay the army, and also the army would have to have. The government would have to have political legitimacy. It would have to operate as a legitimate polity. What I'm thinking of is during old English history, so under Cromwell and during the Glorious Revolution, the army wanted to know that the system it was serving was legitimate, had legitimate authority. It was recognised as the government, and also that it was able to pay the wages of the soldiers. So the government, I guess, it would still have to have some income coming in. I think probably if the government goes broke, it just goes completely broke, and it's going to soldiers saying, "We can't pay you this month." And I think a lot of soldiers would probably just go home at that.
If the ability to spend went to near zero, then yeah. But is that what you think is most likely then?
I think I do. Yeah, I think once it gets going, I think it'll break down like, let's say, like the Soviet Union broke down, like Latin American governments broke down, or like the Central European states broke down when the Soviet Union, after World War II, it imposed hyperinflation on those countries in order to collapse their political structures, so that it could then move in and say, we're now bringing you order, we're now bringing our structure. And it did that. It used hyperinflation to do that.
Who used hyperinflation to do that?
The Soviet on the sort of Central Eastern European states. I think Hungary is the main example that gets quoted, where they wanted to take over. They knew they weren't welcome, so Stalin got his henchmen just to hyperinflate those currencies.
And the mid-40s, right? End of the war, right? Okay.
Yeah. I think around 47, and that. And it was effective. It worked, and I think a similar thing. They tried a similar thing in East Germany, which is why West Germany then put up its own currency. That's why communists blamed the West for the Berlin Wall. They said the West created its new currency, which we did because East German currency is getting hyperinflated deliberately. So this. I don't think these things happen partially. I think they just feed on themselves. You get feedback loops, and then it all just falls over like a glass of milk. It's a bit like, does a glass of milk fall over 50% or 20%? No, it just breaks and falls over. That's it. It's gone. So, but it's possible it might partially collapse and limp along. I can't see it myself. I mean, give me the opposing view.
Yeah, if it was to only recede, say it goes from being able to spend £1 trillion in a year to say 100 billion, that's probably the worst scenario, because they would be put upon, they'd be embattled, but still have the resources to do all sorts of terrible things. So I hope you're right that if there is going to be a collapse, it's full and it kind of wipes out the state. That would be probably our best chance of surviving. Maybe even go on to good things. But as to whether that will happen, because you can still, even if they stop borrowing, even if the ability to borrow goes away completely, they can still tax, can't they? They can still take money, from. That's how states used to sustain themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so will they not be able to tax anymore?
What if all the people who are getting taxed say, "I'm not going to pay my taxes anymore. You've only got
That sounds amazing. That sounds like the best thing ever. But but I don't expect it. I think people. I mean, that silly thing people say. I like paying taxes. With them, I buy civilization. Like, a lot of people seriously believe that. So I think there will still be tax to be had. It's just the borrowing. That's why I've sort of I don't expect the full collapse. I expect a massive recession of the state, but not the collapse. I think it will dwindle, but to something still monstrous.
But if tax was voluntary, you wouldn't need a tax man.
If so, tell me more what you mean.
What I'm making.
No.
If people can get out of paying taxes, they'll get out of paying taxes. I think I would.
Right, I would too, but
And so if I saw the state just collapsing, I'd say to myself, they're probably not paying their tax inspectors. How are they going to get tax out of all of us? I would simply sit back and think, well, I might be able to get away with this. I just won't pay on time and just see what happens. And if, I don't know how many taxpayers there are, is it 25 million, something like that? If 25 million taxpayers say, I'll just hold back paying my taxes, see if they come enforcing.
Again, I'm guessing 25 million includes all the people who work for the state as well, who aren't really taxpayers, are they? Recipients. So I hope you're right. My experience in life is that anytime I try and convince people that tax is robbery, as a good libertarian,
Yes.
Like, anytime I try and convince people that, people are not really open to that idea. Like, most of them just think, well, what are you going to do without it? Like, you're just asking for trouble. So they just think that's a wacky idea. But in these different circumstances, I mean, there will be more people. I think that the state will still be able to tax quite a lot, enough to pay a big enough armed force to still be top dog, which is what matters to them. I think they will still have that. Even if they're just reserving gold, now if they're just putting some gold aside, like, that can go a long way. I mean, I don't know. But I think they will still be able to tax enough to remain top dog. to be the biggest warlord.
And do you think the army would serve loyally like that?
A much smaller army, a more rudimentary army, but yeah, they will still have an army, and it will be bigger than all the autonomous forces. That's what I think.
Would they be? Well, the anecdote I heard from someone who went on some, I think it was some counter-jihad protest. It was about 10 years ago. And what this fellow told me is that there was some. No, I think it was. There was for some reason there were soldiers there. I think because there'd been a terror threat recently. It might have been outside Parliament. I didn't go. He said there were soldiers with guns, and he went up to one of them and said, "If you were ordered to fire on British people, would you do it?" And he said, "No, I wouldn't." So I wonder. It is about paying, but it's not just about paying them. So
there are, I mean, but you must have met a few pigs in uniform in your life as well, right? Who would fire.
Yeah.
I've met. Yeah. Well, I don't know. They haven't been put to the test. I've met people who I think they would fire. And also, I mean, it's one reason to recruit people of other groups into the police and the armed forces as well. But I don't know how far that's actually succeeded. But certainly there are people who would fire on us if they were told we were all racists or what. I don't know. I really don't know. That's a hard thing to predict, isn't it? I'm sure a hell of a lot of them would refuse to fire. Yeah, we saw that in Russia in 1905. That was a thing, wasn't it? There was no, they did fire on one day though. There was that bloody Sunday in Russia. No, it's a mixture in Russian history. Yeah, but I think, well, those soldiers were definitely getting paid anyway, so that's a different question. But I think the state, it won't. I mean, I'm totally willing to be criticised on this, but I think the state isn't in danger of oblivion. It's in danger of a massive recession, a receding. So I guess we differ there, right? I think there'll still be an armed force, sort of state monopoly armed force of whatever name, and it will have the most weapons and the best experience and training. And I don't know. I was going to say be the best motivated, but perhaps not that. Perhaps very mercenary. Perhaps relying only on money and prepared to desert. Maybe, I'm not sure. Or consisting of psychopaths who just want to kill anyone. There are people like that.
Yeah,
who just want the opportunity to shoot people. My answer is if I have to go with an answer, I would say I think the state will recede to something that is still powerful. Just much less powerful.
I would go with the opposites. I think primarily because I think these collapses just turn into collapse like a waterfall. And so the waterfall doesn't go halfway down the mountain, it just goes all the way down the mountain. And also because of, I think, the general mentality. The stories you tell me of acquaintances who say, oh, this wouldn't happen, that wouldn't happen. I don't think that's because they know it wouldn't happen. I think it's because they find it unthinkable that it might happen. And that's certainly what I notice when people say that to me a lot of the time. And that's the fact that people find it so unthinkable that they have to deny it just means that that's a sign that people will react really badly when it does happen. People will react in unthinkable ways when the unthinkable happens. And you just get a kind of chaos.
Yeah. Were you going to say something?
No, go on.
Do you have anything more to say about why? Like why it's so all-consuming? If this collapse occurs, why should it wipe out the state entirely rather than just diminish it?
Because I think you get a feedback loop. So government starts going broke, can't provide services, and the sort of the ingrained, almost innate expectation that we've had for generations is government is there to provide for me. It protects me, it provides. It will look after me if I don't have a job, it will look after me if I'm unwell. Any kind of survival need is met by the government. That's really deeply ingrained for a lot of people, to the extent you just can't debate with most people. You can't debate the end of that with most people because people just will not accept that it might happen. I say, no, it won't. It's just not going to happen. Don't talk about it. And I've very, very seldom been able to discuss the possibility of that happening with anyone, and that leads me to think, if it does happen, those people are going to react really, really badly. They react to the way I react to oxygen. So I think no one's going to take my oxygen supply away. Don't be daft. And if they did, well, I'd probably try and kill them if they try to deprive me of oxygen. And I think that is a lot of people's attitude towards the welfare state. It is there. It is part of nature. As the good Lord provided the NHS for us and housing benefit, as you'll see in chapter X, verse Y of the Bible, it's the Lord provides welfare. And it's a religious thing, and the NHS is the altar of that religion. And I think that the reaction, if that does happen, is going to be extreme, and that gets you into a feedback loop of rejecting government authority, which then reduces government's authority to extract money and assert its authority as well. Because state authority, I think, even with the help of the army, is asserted by consent. I mean, there just are not enough soldiers and there are not enough policemen to prevent them. So it's because we accept it and we go along with it.
Well, I was going to say just a minute ago, you say people will probably have an extreme reaction if they realise the NHS isn't there for them anymore, and so on. So those people take the idea of the social contract very seriously, whereas I guess you and I are pretty cynical about that. But they really believe it and they act upon it. You're saying.
Yeah, that's most people. It's never going to go. It's how can you say this? And you're evil for suggesting it, by the way. Of course, it's like suggesting that the apple falls upwards. No, the state provides. If I'm ill, I go to hospital. It's visceral, that expectation.
And so if something happens that persuades them that contract is gone, then they really transform. They really act completely differently. There's a decisive break from, that causes a big break. You're saying, right?
Yeah.
Right. So then, apart from the spending question, the state has the problem of just people just cease to be willing. I mean, I love the sound of that. That sounds great. I'm more pessimistic than you on that point, I guess.
If that happens, then the police can't enforce their authority because there just aren't enough of them, and that's when crime. And then the more it gets going, and the less people accept the authority of the state, the harder time the state has imposing its authority, because it's it's like the little boy putting his finger in the dikes. As long as there's just a few holes, he can do it. But when the flood really gets going, there's just nothing they can do to resist it. And I don't think it makes. I'm not quite sure the army is going to want to go around policing crime or tax collecting,
and won't be good at it. Even if they are assigned to that, they'll be terrible at it as well, right? Isn't that's a thing people say, that usually if the army is called upon to do something, it's like, well, just make it brief because they can't do it.
If you imagine the gang from It Ain't Off Hot Mum suddenly having to collect taxes, I think you're like Lofty and Gloria coming and enforcing the tax. I mean, they're just not going to be able to do it. Or Dad's Army, Captain Mannering, I hear you haven't paid your tax bill. I'm good. I mean, he's just not going to be able to do it. So and I would have thought one of the first things I would do is, I'm not paying this tax bill, because I just think, I'll wait for them to come to my door. Whereas I don't do that at the moment because I know they're going to come to my door. So there's a kind of consensus, but that breaks down when people have lost it, as I think that they will do. I mean, you don't have to accept what I'm saying. What I'd invite people are watching this, and if you put this idea to people, say the welfare state might completely break down at some stage, what do you think will happen? And watch the look in people glaze over, and they just can't. Like you're saying,
they really do. I've seen that myself.
Yeah. It's like you're saying the apple will fall upwards and land on the moon. And what are you talking about? And then if you persist and say, well, it could happen, they'll get hissy at you. You're a heretic.
Yeah, you're pissing me off by bringing it up. Yeah. So the one thing I wanted to question about the loss of legitimacy, I suppose. How do you say in this scenario where that millions of people begin to feel that the social contract has been broken. The state is supposed to provide for us, and it's not doing so. Now I am not supporting the state anymore. What about because I think in all of this, like generally the agents, of which way things go is men, right? It's mostly men who will decide what happens. Largely, I mean, women matter a great deal, but so take that part of British manhood who are just bug men or just like chubby, soft-bodied, effeminate, weak, total cowards. What do they do in that scenario? Like, because they are the people who I think will want to keep paying taxes. They'll want the social contract to be reasserted if they can. Do you think that they will come to the same conclusions? Because I think those people are the most extreme advocates and servants of the state.
Yeah.
They're the ones who really dread any other way of life, right? And they will try and crawl back into the box. They will So do you think that they will still react as you said a minute ago?
I would have thought they're the ones who would react that way, especially so. They're like the overfed infants who just. I'd have thought they would react. My welfare check, well, so I'm being cruel. Some government benefit hasn't arrived for me today. I can't afford my pizza. I'll throw stones at the police station. I think that's the way they'll think. They'll think like pubescent idiot. They will think like the pubescent idiots they are. That's my view of those people, because they're unthinking,
sort of presumptive, entitled sort of people.
Yeah.
So they will still turn against the state. I mean, they might be ineffective at any sort of resistance or whatever, but they won't be of any use to anyone. But they will still withdraw from obeying the state, and they will thus face the same dilemma that you've talked about: the need for law, the need for everything else, the essentials, and they'll have to get that from somewhere else. They will still do that. You're saying, right?
Yeah, I think initially they'll react really, really badly, and then it will do them the power of good suddenly to be faced with reality and having to rely on their own mettle to develop some character in order to face reality. I think it'll be doing such people a favour.
Yeah. I mean, presumably, it's a bit like I have to sort of word it carefully, but presumably in the scenario, the whole scenario you've laid out over the last few years, presumably you think there is going to be some serious trouble. Like some people are going to get badly hurt, right? I mean,
yeah, I think so.
I mean, like from rising crime and also from conflict, like struggles for power. Do you think?
Yes, perhaps. Yeah. Hold on, just give me a second.
Seems unavoidable to me.
Yes.
I'm just taking a look at the chat while you're thinking.
Yeah, if you just go, I think that's. Sorry, repeat the question. Would you mind?
What did I say?
Oh, people will die. Will they die?
Yeah, there's going to be violence. I mean, not just the violence that we have anyway from crime and that increasing, but also conflict. Like people resorting to, hurting each other badly. Ordinary people.
Yeah, if what I'm saying is likely to happen, does happen, I think people will die through disorder and through ceasing the welfare state. I have no illusions. I don't think that's going to be nice. If you picture, say, the 25-year-old or 23-year-old mum, she's got 3 children through different dads that she doesn't see. She lives in a flat, in a block of flats, and suddenly her rent subsidy doesn't land in the bank account that week, and then the dog shit doesn't arrive, and the children are hungry, and the stairwell fills up with rubbish, and the lift stops working, and the gangs rule around her. Yeah. What does she do? And a father and a job has been a rarity in her neighbourhood for 3 generations. What does she do? She presumes she can't sell her body.
Right.
Because probably that's £1 a go in those circumstances.
You're trying to address the particulars of it. Yeah.
How does she, maybe find some man and say, listen, you can just provide food for my children. You can do what you like to me. You enjoy yourself on me, but just provide food for the children. That's all else. This is if she has the gumption to do even that. I don't know. I don't think she deserves that. What I'm saying is, it is not nice. What I'm talking about. I don't think it'll be some kind of carnival, and I'll be proved right. Good for me. That's not the point I'm trying to make. So I think that could happen. The other thing is, as I was saying about home invasions, or the increase in crime. I hate crime. I used to be a prosecutor. I came to hate crime and criminals. I hated defending them. I just can't. And I'm extremely punitive. I favour very aggressive law enforcement. I think prison sentences are far too short. Sadly, I think the death penalty does work. I think social exclusion is a good thing for people with criminal records. They should be rigorously excluded from society. So, I don't, when I talk about crime getting out of control, I don't think, I have no illusions about what that means. So, and I think that is likely to happen. As regards conflict, I would say almost certainly there's going to be some form of ethnic and racial conflict, because that's sort of hardwired into a situation like that. I think it's hardwired into us. But I think massacre is a feature of human nature, an evolved feature of human nature. So, and I have no illusions what massacre is like. I don't think that's a good thing. But this brings me on to another of those questions that I've listed. But what I suspect will happen is you will get populations separating out, because you'll get really much more white flight on both sides. So what I can see is, say, white people who live in enriched areas just having to flee with the clothes on their back, pretty much.
Yeah.
And probably a similar thing happening for foreigners living in white areas. So you get that separation. I could see that being quite a mini form of ethnic cleansing going on, just because people will only want people they trust around them. Now, this comes to what I think the way to avoid that kind of violence, conflict, and disorder is to make sure you get a polity, a system fast. So a legal system that can apply itself, has authority, and can get recognised. I think that's the key thing. That's my solution to that, is to get up a legal code, which I've got up, that people can use and adopt. And if you do that, I think that's how you get the army on your side, because you say the government's broken down, they carry no authority, they're just trying to preserve their power base. We have got up a new system, a new polity. It's accepted, it is recognised, it creates order, it is humane, it is civilised. Come and, you soldiers, we can pay you, come and be our army instead. I think that's the way you get the army on your side. But what it depends on is getting up your polity fast. And the way that I think that happens is we say, well, the state's broken down, the state can't provide order anymore. Doesn't matter how much you want it to, it's gone, it is dead. But I now am offering you a system that you can join voluntarily. You pay your subs, that pays for the policemen, the bailiffs, the courts, the prisons. And there's a legal code. It's similar to what we have now, you understand it. Join this system, and everyone else who joins will treat you in the same way. And then you have safety living near other people. It also means you can trade, you can make money, you can engage in business, you can get employed, you can have a bank account. And people like money, so it enables people to do that.
That's an important point, isn't it? Like that, money relies upon law as well. So yeah, like a functioning money system.
Yeah. So what this brings to what I've outlined there, I'm trying to see if anyone in the chat is saying, "My God, this sounds crazy. Are you on acid?" or something like that. They're not so far, maybe. But what my question there is, what I've outlined there, does that sound crazy? Am I on acid?
If you're asking me, no, all that bit I agree with. It's whether we get to that I'm dubious about. But if people are faced with what you're laying out there, then I think that is roughly how they will react. And I'd say again, strongly agree with the need for law, and that's often under-mentioned. But that is primal. It's like slightly lower in the hierarchy than oxygen, water, food, but it's pretty much next. It's like people rely on law, and money is more important than people realize as well, as we've obviously discussed. But yeah, there's silly ideas among some people that money doesn't matter, that it's always just a tool of exploitation. No. It's extremely useful. It's useful for almost everything that we call civilization. So yeah, I think that people will react, as you said. Where I depart is whether we get there. I'm not sure.
Yes.
Whether the state,
yes,
disappears basically.
Yes. We have a difference of opinion as to whether the state breaks down completely as opposed to a bit or partially.
And it's hard for even me to imagine as well, even though I think about it. I use my intellect for that, but instinctively, I still resist the idea that there could not be a state a few years from now.
But putting it aside, assuming the state has gone up in a puff of smoke, okay, and for some whatever reason, then the question is, if the state breaks down, do we think that people will search for lawful ways to provide order rather than just scrap in the mud or appeal to gang lords to protect them?
Yeah, I think especially English people will. I think, obviously there's various other populations in our country now, and like some of them maybe won't. Some of them may be quite accustomed to a degree of anarchy, or just warlord life or gang life or whatever is their instincts to, whatever they're going to default to. But I think English people specifically, and Scots and so on, they will. They know that they value law. It's something that it's evolved as part of our culture. It's not something that has evolved universally. Well, maybe some kind of law, but what we mean by law and order and civilization, if they can get it. I do think people will react like that. One perhaps complication is that obviously a lot of people know or are related to someone who's in a relationship with someone of another race, right, or have got mixed race children. That's going to complicate things. I mean, I know you were asked this before, weren't you, on one of your on our stream or one of your videos? You addressed this, like what happens with mixed race people? What do they gravitate? I think the answer to that, I think this is roughly what you said as well, is that they will be peripheral. They will have to probably geographically, peripherally, they have to live between the races that they're mixed of. It will be something like that, because they will be partly accepted and not fully accepted by both. But yeah, I think English people in particular would probably, if faced with this situation, they would lead the way. They would be the first people to appreciate the need for law. It would happen on the first day. If law is in doubt, let's have law of a new kind. Yeah, I think you're right about that.
All right, that's so. The bit that I thought people might disagree with the most, I think was the most fanciful. That's the bit that we agree on quite easily, I think.
I think so. I think the very idea of law is quite English, isn't it? I think.
I think so. And it's essential for making money, because, like, if I say, Horus, I'll buy your car, deliver it, and I'll send you a check in the post. I mean, you'll do it because you can sue me. Do you know what?
Right, because of the law.
Yeah.
And people, whatever silly ideas people have about money now, they will realise that, if they're forced to use barter for one day, they will realise that they do appreciate money. That money is a great thing, is a great invention. Like a barter means primitive, right? A primitive economy is a destitute one, is a miserably poor, pointless, horrible life. So people will appreciate the need for money. So that's a further impetus to have law. So yeah, I agree with you again.
Yeah. When people tell me that money doesn't matter, I always count my spoons.
I mean, there's so many daft sort of anti-capitalist, vague anti-capitalist ideas around, especially in nationalism. It's sad to say. I mean, I see a lot of outright socialists and stuff, and they don't know what they're talking about. Most people don't. Most people think that economics is boring or dry or difficult, and it's actually not. I mean, most people already have ideas about economics. They've been convinced that economics is a thing for professors and statisticians and stuff, and it's not true. Like, most people already have ideas about it. it's just philosophy. It's just a part of philosophy, and philosophy is part of understanding life and social life and reality.
Yeah.
And so the need for money will be a further reason to recreate law. And I think English people appreciate that more than most. So it'll be quite immediate, I think.
Well, the way that I put it is the state has to survive 100%, has to maintain 100% monopoly in order to survive.
Yes.
The system I'm talking about needs to gain a 1% toehold in order to prevail at 100%. So what I mean by that is, let's say the sort of system I'm talking about where you just join voluntarily and if that gets a 1% toehold in a corner of England, everyone's going to want to join it because it will be an island of wealth and order in a sea of chaos and taxation. And the area I'm talking about won't have taxation. So suddenly Google, let's say my system gets set up in a little corner of Hartlepool. Suddenly Google will relocate to that corner of Hartlepool because there's no tax. And Facebook will be next door. And so wage rates go through the ceiling because they're recruiting. And everyone's going to want to join. So what you have is an orderly, trading, safe place to live that's extremely wealthy. And so if it gets a 1% toehold, that's it. Go home, game over. That's why I think it's likely to happen. So that again comes back to the crux of it, which I hadn't expected, is your point. The state might not completely collapse, which might not.
Yeah, and as I said, that if I'm right about that, then that's a worse scenario. In your scenario, the problems can be solved. In mine, the problems will perpetuate, will be continually perpetuated by the same people who caused them in the first place, the same bastards, because they'll still have the means to exist, and where they exist, they. I just think it is in the nature of the state to just always cause problems, and like you said, to grind people down, to deliberately make people poorer. I think that's what the Davos agenda is about.
Yes.
It's deliberate impoverishment for class reasons or for rulership reasons.
Yeah.
So if the state continues, as I said, that's a really bad scenario. They will continue to ruin everything. They'll continue to, if just for the sake of remaining monopolists, they will just smash apart anything good that other people try and bring up and build up. So I don't know, am I answering your question there? Sorry, my brain's running down a bit now.
No, are you okay to keep going?
I would say, I diminish in quality myself after a while because my brain gets tired, but I don't mind doing another one if you want to pick up more questions. But I can go on for another sort of 20 minutes if that's all right.
Well, how about if we go on? It might be an idea to continue this with to finish off the questions. Let's do another one and see how we get on. Okay. It sounds like you're the bad guy. You're saying we could be facing a really horrible dystopia, which is possible, I guess. Now, if the next question is, if what I think we're saying happens, what the state breaks down and then people decide they need law and they do it themselves because the state isn't there anymore, we're assuming, then will that settle out will that be ethnically and racially divided? Do you think so? This comes back to the question that you mentioned about what about mixed race children or mixed race people? What happens to them? I guess the first question is, will there be an ethnic racial division in those circumstances, and how hard will that division be?
Yeah, I think because trust is so important, the ability to just say, right, that guy is doing that thing, the division of labour requires a degree of trust and mutual understanding, and most advanced things, most things worth doing require a division of labour, so thereby require trust. And trust does have quite a bit to do with ethnicity and stuff. And just as I said before, the ability to read people without necessarily talking to them, and that's a factor, I think. Or just the ability to trust what they have said to you and so on. I think that has a lot to do with ethnicity. So because of that, yes. I think there will still be some people who absurdly try and maintain anti-racist ideas. Like there are some people who really have taken that to heart. It's ludicrous, but they have. So some people will try and sabotage this. I think there will be like demented old bats who just live the life of, you know, preaching to everyone that they're racist. But yeah, so there will be some saboteurs and stuff. But I think, yeah, the inclination will be to separate along ethnic lines. Do you think there will be other cleavages as well? I think you're right about ethnicity.
Yeah. Well, I do. The way I don't think the division. I think the division will be racial and ethnic, but not because it's a racist or ethnocentric system, but simply if you look at, say, drug use. Let's forget about race. Let's say if you imagine you've got three systems: one's Hampshire, one's Wiltshire, and one's Dorset. So three counties, or County X, Y, and Z. County X, there's no drugs allowed, and that's enforced. Yeah. County Y, you can smoke weed. County Z, you can take any drug you like. Okay. Now, for me, I don't want to virtue signal here, but I'm not aware that many of my friends take any drugs. I don't like smelling weed in the park. And there's a correlation between even the use of weed and crime. So I don't care if it's causative. I don't particularly want drug use here. Okay? Especially if I was a parent, I think I'd say that. I live in County X, which would mean, and I think probably a lot of other people who don't use drugs would probably do that. And so what that you then get is in County Y, where you're allowed to use, you can only use weed. You can use weed and no other drug. It'll be, everyone there will be a weed smoker, because non-weed smokers will say, I just want to will probably live in the area where you can't smoke any weed, because they'll probably prefer it that way, and it's a lower crime rate in general. And so then what you have is, what I think you'll get then is people who like to smoke weed occasionally will say to themselves, actually, I like smoking weed, but I don't like it enough to have to live amongst other people who are always smoking weed as well. So, I mean, there are people I knew at college. I can't remember if I was one of them, but decided they didn't like weed anymore because they didn't like being around other dopeheads. Do you understand? That's what put some of us, some people who are nameless, put them off. And so I think that would probably be actually a very good drug rehabilitation strategy, because people would say, weed smokers would say, I don't want to smoke weed anymore because it means I have to live with other people who smoke weed, and I don't want to do that.
Yeah, the cost isn't just to your health and that, but it's also what kind of society you live in.
Yeah, and you just can't get away from it. So, and similarly, and then in County Z, it's a free for all. I mean, it's crank, it's that horse drug, whatever. It's snowballing. I don't know all the drugs, but whatever.
Hard stuff.
Yeah, what I call the hard stuff. I don't know, but so I'm pretending to be more innocent than I am. The hard stuff. It's only the hard stuff. I think probably a lot of people would say, I just don't like living in a city that's a crack house, a permanent crack house. And they might say, well, I'll limit myself to weed and go and live in the weed only area. So what I think you're likely to get is again another feedback loop. I wouldn't want to live in the area where everyone smokes weed. I just find it intolerable. So I'll live in the area where nobody smokes weed. I certainly wouldn't want to live in the area where all drug use is permitted, because it's only hard. The only people who will live there will be people who use hard drugs, if you follow the point I'm making. So that way you get a sort of a feedback loop, stuffing people into what I call the clean area. And I think you will get that with race. So you and I think I would say, I don't want to entrust my safety to Muslim or African people.
Yeah.
Much more highly criminalized. It means I have to pay a lot more money to be the victim of more crimes. I don't want to do that. So I'm going to join the system that excludes them. And then the daft old multiculturalist bat, she's going to find, hold on, suddenly all of my neighbours are Africans and Muslims. It was all right. Previously, I was able to lecture other people about the oneness of it and tell them to celebrate it.
Right.
But now I have to live amongst it, and actually, it's not spread out amongst the whole population. It's just me and a few other daft old bats like me amongst a million Africans and Muslims, and we're getting picked on all the time. I don't like this, and they will say. I think that they'll say, "Well, I'm going to join the pure white English area. You know, I'm going to join the horrible white English area." That's what they'll say, to change it from the inside, to change the racist system from the inside. But they'll join it one way or the other. So, and it's that sort of moralistic feedback loop that you get, because people have an incentive to join a system that makes restrictions, to join a system that says people who have more than this number of points on their criminal record, we don't want them in. And so it becomes a bad side to it. I can see it becomes very moralistic, but you create I keep using the feedback loop for people. If people can join your the English area, they will, because the more people who join it, the worse it comes to be in the multicultural area. Do you see what I'm saying? And that sort of forces people into a very hardened ethnic separation, which I think will be useful for a useful basis for repatriation.
Yeah, I think so. Like, very, very few people, when it comes to the reality of it, are going to have any reason to live anywhere other than among their own group. Like, it's just going to be a bad choice for most people. So if we are free to separate out along ethnic lines, if and when that is the case, like, that is the choice nearly everyone will make. There will be some crazy extremists who try and, but whatever. But yeah, for most people, that is just going to be the almost automatic choice, I think. Yeah. It would be mad to want to live in a Whitechapel or something. Like, it'd be absolutely crazy. It'd be suicide. You'd be not only not happy, but you'd be in danger of torture. And yeah. So I think that aspect of it, you're right. But my doubt from the start has always been, apart from what I said about will the state disappearing entirely, which I'm doubtful of, and also just if they can continue, they will try to wreck everything good, because everything good is a potential alternative, an attractive alternative to their monopoly, to their way, So if there is the remnant of a state, if the state is only diminished by 80% in its spending power or something, it still exists, still got an army, they will try to wreck that. They brought these people in to blend us, to blend us out of existence. So they will try and continue that. It's very important to them, but we differ on their ability to do that.
Yeah. What I think we're coming to is a juncture. What I wouldn't mind is we're coming to the fun part, which is where the sort of conflict bit where we repatriate people out of the country. Maybe we could save that for another, if you're willing, for another day.
I'm up for talking again. Yeah. You may not get the best out of me now, because after I've talked for a while, I start getting knackered. So, but I'm up for talking more another session. Yeah.
Thank you. And that, I think that's the fun part. That's the bit where we triumph, where we achieve according to what I think. That's the bit where we triumph. So, is there any more you want to say on any more comments you want to make about what we've said? So
I think it's pretty clear where we differ in our expectations. One thing I would just say to everyone watching is, obviously you said a few videos ago, like you welcome people to challenge you on this. Like, I am someone who's I'm on the same page as you to a large extent, but I'll welcome anyone listening or anyone who tries to take on these issues at all, to get in touch with Gavin and talk about it, because I agree with you. People should discuss this with you. I think it's the right lines to be thinking along. It may be that we're being too optimistic in a way. It may be that we're just missing something. We're only two people, and maybe someone else has a reason why you're wrong entirely. I don't know. If you are wrong entirely, I hope not. But I would also like to know, because Because what you say makes me somewhat optimistic, and there's nothing worse than false optimism. So
have I just persuaded myself of it?
Right, because that is a danger, isn't it? Confirmation bias and so on. Right. I haven't found the flaw in your analysis, other than I think you may be wrong that the state disappears entirely. But most of the rest of what you said, I agree with. But as I say, I want people to challenge it. I think it's a good idea that, and for that reason, should be challenged. You know, I would only say that of an idea that's interesting in the first place. I think if anybody, I mean, I was sort of part of the sort of nationalist sphere. I'm not really an active part of that scene anymore, but I don't know what most of them think of this. As I said, a lot of people in the nationalist sphere think of you as a servant of the tribe, just a counter jihad guy, or of the tribe yourself, which invalidates you as well, apparently, and all these things. And that was the first comment on the live chat today. It was just, Gavin Bowie's a J. No, I know, but there's a lot of prejudice against you among sort of ethno-nationalists. So I've tried to tell people you pretty much are one yourself. Maybe not the same kind. I don't know. You're not a Hitler worshipper, but I told people on Telegram, like, Gavin's not what you think. So I encourage people, get in touch with Gavin and take on these issues. I think this is important.
Thank you. And now is the time to do it, to think through how we can save ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I was a supporter of PA for a while, and but I don't see them or the British Democrats or any other nationalist group making any headway. It's sad, they're good people, but I don't see that taking us anywhere. I obviously don't believe that voting for any of the other parties is going to achieve anything. I don't see a viable new party on the horizon. I do believe that voting can work, if people change, but I don't see any sign of them changing. Dominic Cummings is talking about a new party, but that will probably just be some bollocks. It's just he's not going to see all the problems that need solving, and it's just if people need to, try and think along new lines, and obviously what we're talking about is involved some knowledge of economics, so that's something that will put some people off. But I'd say to people, learn a bit about economics, because it could be the route to a better future.
Yes,
it's possible. Like, it could be for bad reasons that turn into good reasons later on, that we don't have to be as afraid as we are, and to have some fear lifted off your back can help you see things clearer as well. If everybody thinks that our race is just going to be, our nation is just going to be inexorably ground into nothing over the next 20 years, then they've got every reason to be depressed and fearful and maybe inactive as well. Whereas if there is a potential way that we can be saved, possibly even without a great deal of suffering, then you may find yourself more effective as an activist or more effective as a survivor. Like, that's the last thing I mentioned is just I saw the Woodlander in the chat. I doubt Woodlander is going to engage you on questions of economics. I don't think he talks about economics, but he's someone who's preparing for a future where the state does nothing for us, nothing whatsoever. Mm-hmm. So that's there's people thinking along at least some of the same lines as you in that sense.
I know.
I'd encourage all of them to engage with you.
Yes. And what I'd like to, if we talk again, is I'd like to pick out some of the questions from the chat, because I think there will be some good questions in there, and perhaps to answer those, there might be some good objections in there as well.
Hopefully. Yeah. I don't see. I've looked at the chat sort of 4 or 5 times while we've been talking. I'm not seeing really anybody commenting on what we've said about economics, and that is a big sort of grey spot for most people listening to us. But I don't know. Maybe we can find someone who will engage you on that question, because it's where it all starts from, isn't it?
Yes. I found this very interesting because it's picked a hole in my argument where I didn't expect it.
Right.
That's valuable. So I can now go away and rationalise a way to fill that hole, you see.
Yeah, that's good. I'll listen back to the relevant parts of this, because sometimes later you return to the same question with a different answer. So I'll continue to reconsider my own opinion on that as well.
Or come up with or strengthen it.
Yeah, right. Right. Yeah. Good call.
Do you need any other comments? Thank you, people, for watching. I'm very grateful. Thanks for your comments. Some of them quite funny, actually. But I won't go through them now because it's getting on.
Just one last thing. Maybe you could tell people: is it best for them to comment under your videos? Is that the best way to?
Yes. Comment under my videos. Comment under this one. This is a live stream. I don't know if you can add comments after the stream has ended.
You can, yeah.
Oh yeah, then please do that. Stick in. Put in your comments. Put in questions. I do read them. I try not to get too involved in the comments under YouTube videos because it's sort of where do I stop? And also it's a question of time. But if people can do that, then I'll review them for when Horus and I talk again, and we can go through those questions then. I'm going to be publishing another video as to why they're doing it for us. If you've got another question, even if it's not relevant to the video, please stick it in there. And I do review them. I do look at them and value them. And the reason it's so valuable, the reason if you're doing a service is because now, whilst we're all asleep, whilst nothing is happening, whilst there really isn't much pushback, now's the time. Take advantage of that to think through what we can do. The planning, what's said is plans don't work as they're planned out, but the planning process, planning things, that is priceless. So that thinking, just the process of thinking, that is priceless. So that's what I think we should do. And thank you, Horus, for doing that with me now.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's really one of the most interesting things to talk about, I think. So yeah, thank you.
I do appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Cool. Should I drop off?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
All right. Bye-bye, Horus. Bye-bye.
Cheers, mate. Bye-bye.